My family was a large one, a family of 7. There was our parents, my 3 sisters, then me and my brother, the only boys who are also the youngest. I'm in my early 20s while my brother, Stanley, is 16. You'd think me and Stanley would have some kind of special bond or relationship between us or something, as a result of being the only males in the household besides our father. But that isn't exactly how things went around here. My sisters loved to pamper Stanley. He was the youngest, and they babied him 24/7. By the way, that's exactly how they addressed him, baby. How's my baby doing? I think my baby forgot his lunch in the fridge. Don't forget to pick my baby up from school today. They still kissed him on the lips like he was 4 years old, and every now and then they sleep in the same bed with him. I've been outwardly irritated by this for years, and I've already been telling them since forever about how Stanley is practically an adult now, and how they should back off a little. I told them they should stop kissing him on the lips, and stop crawling into the bed with him at night. I stopped wasting my breath doing that a while ago. It would typically turn into a heated argument anyway, but I always tried reminding them that they didn't treat me like that when I was his age. I didn't allow it. They tell me just because I didn't appreciate the affection while it was there, to not try and ruin it for someone else. Crazy, right? But the worst part of it all, Stanley didn't seem to have a problem with all this. Yeah, he fucking liked it. I've also tried telling him to man up and stop letting the girls do these things to him. He often responded saying that he didn't see what the big deal was. Eventually, I just gave up altogether, but me throwing in the towel didn't make the situation any less annoying. It frustrated me seeing how much of a pushover Stanley was. He sometimes struggled when he came to standing up for himself. So as a result of all that, Stanley had a much closer relationship with the girls in the household than he did with me. I won't lie, I've always hated things being that way. I really wished I could be the big brother to Stanley I've been urging to be for many years. I wanted him to change for the sake of having a bond with him that I deemed ideal. But boy, did I not know what I was asking for. The surprise of my life all started when the killings began in our city. On one stormy night, all 7 of us were in the living room of our home when we saw the first murder being reported on the news. A young man had been fatally shot, then robbed of all his valuables. The reporter on the screen stood in the rain as she gave more details about the story. When the reporter started talking about possible clues at the crime scene, I glanced over and saw Stanley staring at the television, eyes wide. One of my sisters, Angie, saw this right away. While grinning, she said, "Aw, I think my baby's getting scared." She laughed, then began tickling Stanley, who also started laughing and slightly twitching from the sensation. I rolled my eyes and sighed before looking at the screen again. I heard Mom and Dad tell them to be quiet, as they were trying to hear the story. After a few minutes, all the lights in the house suddenly went out, right along with the television. The storm outside had knocked out the power. "Oh shit," Dad said. "Looks like we're in the dark for the night." From the slight moonlight gleaming in through the living room window, I could see the silhouette of his body standing up out of the comfort of his lazy-boy chair. Mom got up from the sofa nearby and used the light from her phone to help her see her way into the kitchen. Dad followed. My sisters, Kayla and Angela, went to light some candles. They brought about 4 lit candles down all together, giving Angie and I one of our own. Then the 2 of them headed upstairs. When Angie finally stood up and decided that she was going to hit the sack, I wasn't too surprised to see Stanley hop on her back and giggle as Angie carried him upstairs to her room. With a slight frown on my face, I laid back on the couch and dozed off after turning my back on them. It was about another week before we heard about the next murder. This time a couple was killed, but their deaths were a little more grisly than the last. On the news, they didn't go into too much detail about how the murders were committed, but later on I went to my computer and looked more into it. The man was missing his right leg. Apparently it was the work of a shotgun. The woman had multiple gunshot wounds to the face from a smaller caliber of ammo. Then, just like the last murder, the couple had been stripped of all their money and other valuable possessions. Mom was the one who told us about this one morning while watching the news. She also warned everyone to be careful and look closely to their surroundings when we decided to go out. But like everyone else, we always assumed that nothing bad would happen to us, because bad things only happen to other people. That day, Mom wanted to send one of us to the store. Another storm was supposed to happen in a couple days, and she wanted to be better prepared by having extra candles, flashlights, and other handy things that would be easily accessible when needed. That someone was me. But she didn't want me going alone, so she asked Stanley to ride along. I didn't see why that was necessary, but I figured she was worried about what she'd just seen on the news. Stanley entered the kitchen with a slight smirk on his face. He was wearing his favorite V-neck sweater with khakis, something he wore almost every day. Nothing really wrong with how he dressed, but I didn't understand why he felt the need to look like he was going to a job interview all the time. Shortly after, Angela came in behind him, right away fiddling with his hair and sweater, trying to neaten him up. She licked her thumb and scrubbed a small area on his cheek. Stanley's face scrunched up in disgust as he leaned backwards and grabbed her hand. "Ugh, spit," Stanley exclaimed. Angela snickered, then said, "You had something on your face." I rolled my eyes, then sighed. "Angela, come on. Is this really necessary? We're just running to the store for a quick minute. It's not like he's going to meet the damn president," I complained. Angela's smile went away and turned into a frown. "No need to be rude about it," she mumbled, before turning and heading towards the refrigerator. I turned and glanced at Stanley. His grin was now a wide smile. "What are you so grumpy about today?" he asked, resting his head on his hand, still smiling. "Nothing. Just forget about it," I lied. "And let's just get to the store so we can pick this stuff up for Mom." I was always annoyed when Stanley had his baby-ish moments with the girls. "All right, big guy," Stanley said loudly. I heard Angela giggle while fidgeting around in the fridge. Then she dashed across the kitchen and gave Stanley a quick kiss before hurriedly dashing back. She started laughing hysterically as I glared back at her, as she knew it would tick me off. When I turned and saw Stanley laughing too, I simply just walked out in frustration. Going shopping for Mom was a simple enough task. The store was a lot less crowded than usual, but we still ended up staying a lot longer than I wanted because my sisters often called and told us to pick up this and that while we were out. On top of this, there were also a few items Mom of course forgot to mention before we left. As Stanley and I loaded the car with our items out in the parking lot, we noticed a 4-door white truck parked next to us. I knew it wasn't there before we went in the store. The windows were tinted so dark that they were virtually just flat out pitch black, so I couldn't see if there was anyone in the truck or not. I questioned how they even managed to see their way all the way here. But just when I turned my back on the truck and sat the last bag in the trunk, I heard the doors open behind me. Then I saw Stanley's face quickly gain a frightful expression. "Thomas, look out!" he yelled, but it was already too late. I felt the barrel of a gun leaning on the back of my neck. "Don't you fucking move," I heard a voice mumble in my ear. Stanley was about to run away, but another guy ran from behind me and caught up to him before putting a Glock to his temple. Stanley froze up instantly, then he was led back to me. Stanley looked frightened, desperate to think of something quick, just as I was. Then I saw that the guy holding Stanley hostage did nothing to protect his identity. nothing covering his face. I thought that was pretty stupid, honestly, especially when considering the fact that they're pulling this stunt in broad daylight. The guy holding Stanley at gunpoint was a white male, maybe in his late 20s. He had long hair that extended down past his shoulders and a full beard. I even saw a ring that had the silhouette of a hooker pierced into one of his ears. As he pointed the Glock at Stanley's head, he looked at me and grinned. A lot of his teeth were brown and rotted, with half of his bottom ones nearly eradicated. "Looks like you two should have parked in a different spot, eh?" the yak-mouthed guy taunted. He wasn't wrong. Almost every time I leave the house, Mom always warned me to park in a spot that was close to the building. Of course, the advice always went in one ear and out the other. But as I've already stated, bad things only happen to other people. "Dude, look, whatever you want, just take it and leave us be," I started. "Shut up!" Yak-Mouth yelled, now starting to pat Stanley down. "Just let us get what we need and we'll be out in no time. Yeah, just be good little girls and cooperate. Then everything will be just fine," I heard another guy behind me comment. Yak-Mouth pulled out Stanley's wallet and swiped a small amount of cash he had. I felt a hand from behind me pat me up and down. I could also feel my wallet and cell phone being slid out of my pockets. I looked at Stanley's face and saw his eyes begin to fill with tears. Then his face scrunched up. Yak-Mouth saw this, then started laughing. "What a pathetic fucking dweeb," he said, now laughing more hysterically. I heard the mystery goons behind me get a laugh in. I still haven't seen them yet. "This little bitch looks like he's on the verge of pissing himself." Stanley started to whimper. I just stared at them both, heart racing in my chest. I already knew more crying would possibly make the situation worse. At that moment, I thought I was going to lose my little brother, and possibly my own life afterwards. But surprisingly, all Yak-Mouth did was pistol whip Stanley a few times across the head, knocking him to the ground before saying, "That's the least a little bitch like you deserve." After that, Yak-Mouth raided our car, then went through our bags in the trunk and took as he pleased, which was mostly the flashlights and hardware material we got for Dad. Luckily, they didn't take my car. As soon as Yak-Mouth cherry-picked his items, him and his goons hopped back in the white truck and took off. As soon as they left, I went over to Stanley to help him back on his feet. He could barely stand up at all, as he was likely still seeing stars from all those blows to the head. He wobbled constantly as I helped him gain his balance. His nose was bloody, and there was a wound on one side of his face that wouldn't stop bleeding. The blood dripped from his face and slowly ruined his favorite V-neck sweater. They stole our cell phones, so we had no other choice but to go back inside of the store to use their phone and contact our parents. As soon as we stepped in, all eyes turned to us. People heard me panicking and asking to use the store phone. I saw a lot of people inside gain expressions of concern. A young girl behind one of the registers led us to the store manager, who first called the police after we told him what happened. Then he allowed us to call our parents. The police came to the store and questioned us. We told them everything. The truck they were in, what they robbed us of, and how the thieves looked. Especially Yak-Mouth. He was the easiest to remember. When we got back home, everyone was already waiting at the door as soon as we stepped in. Mom and Dad came rushing over to us. Then they hugged us like there was no tomorrow. Our sisters came right behind them. All three of them surrounding us, asking questions and hugging us almost to the point of suffocation. When they saw the damage done to Stanley's face, Angela took Stanley by the hand and led him to the kitchen table, where she treated his wounds with the first aid kit we kept in the kitchen. Her and Kayla asked him many more questions while they sat at the table, while Angie still had her arms wrapped around me. Over the next 2 weeks, there were yet again a few more murders. Just like before, all the victims were gunned down, with all their money and other possessions stripped from them. But the killings were getting more gruesome as the body count increased. It was becoming more prevalent for the victims to be found with missing limbs and vital organs. A lot of the bodies had entire arms and legs ripped away and detached from their bodies, along with internal organs blown feet away from where they dropped. According to the news, the guns used were a .357 caliber Magnum and a 12-gauge shotgun. This maniac had two favorite weapons of choice. However, he or she, most likely a he, was dubbed the 12-gauge Ripper. The shotgun was obviously what did most of the grisly damage. The fact that this killer was also a robber led many to believe that encountering him empty-handed would save their lives. To me, this was bogus. Yeah, the killer obviously wanted money, but I didn't think that was the primary motive. I theorized that this killer was simply just some sadistic thug, and stealing money was just a bonus that came on the side. At this point, the entire city was in a panic. A lot of people didn't leave their homes. Some businesses closed earlier than usual, and a lot of parents put a stop to their children walking to school alone. Those bastards at the parking lot. I was certain that it had to be them. We gave the police a good description of at least one of the guys, so I figured they had to be close to figuring out something. The thought of Stanley and I becoming their next victims just sent chills through me. The thought of Stanley and I no longer being in the household. I just couldn't. But I also couldn't figure out why they decided to spare our lives while the rest of the victims didn't even come close to being as lucky. The increase in killings resulted in Stanley and I being questioned again about our experience at the supermarket. They of course already had a slight suspicion of our encounter being connected to what was recently happening. 2 more people were killed a few days after the police came to question us again. After that, they began advising people to stay home as much as possible on the news. More businesses jumped on the bandwagon of closing their stores before sunset. The police became more active than they've ever been before. There were cruisers creeping up and down almost every street there was to turn on. There were even officers posted at a lot of the bus stops. When nighttime fell, the streets were silent. People were even more afraid to leave their homes at night. We sure as hell was, especially with Mom on our ass every time we even thought of trying to leave the house. She'd question where we were going and why every time, as a way of making sure the reason was absolutely necessary. The only reasons anyone left the house after that was either for work, school, or buying groceries. My job decided to close early like everyone else, so I was home past 3 o'clock. My sisters would return one at a time a couple hours later, but still before dark. Stanley was always the first one back, from school. My parents were retired, so they rarely left the house at all. The city was practically on semi-lockdown. Our house was a bit quiet for a few days. Everyone stayed separated in their own areas of the house once we were all in for the day. Mom and Dad hung out in the living room while the rest of us locked ourselves up in our bedrooms. At night, we made sure all the windows and doors were locked up and secure. My parents made it clear that there was absolutely no leaving after that. They didn't have to tell us twice. None of us planned on going out and putting ourselves in danger. We heard a few knocks on the front door one night. I walked out of my room and stood at the edge of the stairs only to see Mom and Dad already staring up at me from the sofa. Dad was shaking his head while Mom was putting her finger up to her lips. I got the message right away. Don't answer the door. Then Kayla and Angela came creeping up behind me. There's someone at the door, Kayla said softly. We know, just ignore it, Dad told her, waving her away. Kayla and Angela went back to their rooms, but I headed downstairs because I wanted to grab a snack. Dad glared at me while I came down the steps as he thought I was going to answer the door. I assured him that I was only going to the kitchen as I walked past him. Whoever was at the door knocked again. We all ignored. As I was about to open the snack cabinet and find something to satisfy my munchies, we heard 3 more knocks. Sounded like they did it with a little more force, as the knocks were slightly louder. Then they knocked again. And now they were starting to piss me off. If they see no one is answering, why do they keep wasting their time? Kind of reminded me of the telemarketers who let the phone ring 10,000 fucking times. I heard a loud noise in the living room. It sounded like someone busted down our door. Then Mom screamed. Dad started yelling and cursing at the top of his lungs. "Shut up, old man." There was a much younger and masculine sounding voice in the living room that kind of sounded familiar. I jumped, then went and peeked around the corner of the wall to see what was happening. There was about 4 or 5 masked men in there. I also saw that the front door had been pried open. 2 of the masked men were holding my parents at gunpoint on the sofa. They were terrified. Mom was crying, tightly hugging and staying as close to Dad as possible. The other guys started searching the area, obviously looking for something to steal. "You have any money in here?" one of the masked men asked my dad. Dad didn't answer, so the guy cocked his pistol and asked again. "I said, do you have any fucking money?" the guy shouted. No, Dad stammered. "Fucking liar," the guy mumbled, setting his pistol down on the coffee table behind him and then searching my dad's pockets for cash. He pulled out his wallet and found 2 $100 bills. After snatching them out, he tossed the wallet behind him, then asked, "Anybody else in the house?" I shivered, wondering if Stanley and my sisters could hear the commotion upstairs. It took a second for Dad to answer, then he shook his head. The guy crouched down to look my dad in the face. "I think you're lying to me again," he accused. He glanced back at the other 3 men and said, "Go check upstairs." So they did. As they ran up our stairs, I was about to turn and run out the kitchen door. Then the guy holding my parents hostage glanced up and spotted me peeping. "Hey!" he yelled. He left Mom and Dad, then came running towards me as I ran for the kitchen door. When I ran out into the night air, the first thing I hoped was that Stanley and the girls would at least get away for now. Halfway across the dark backyard, I hear the guy yell again, "Hey!" I glanced back and saw him standing in the door pointing his pistol at me. So I stopped. "Come on back, little sunshine. The party's in here," he said. I had no other choice but to comply. I wasn't that far from him, and after all, he had a gun. I slowly crept back towards him, then he roughly shoved me further into my house before muttering, "Get your ass back in there." By the time I made it back to the living room, I saw that Stanley and my sisters had already been led down by the other goons. One of the guys was holding them at gunpoint from behind. My sisters were crying. Stanley had his arms wrapped around Angie, looking scared and confused. The guy that brought me back in put me on the couch beside Mom and Dad. They were still tensed up, trembling and shaking. "Now listen up," that same guy started, staring at my sisters. "We'll be out of here in no time. Just answer our questions and be cooperative. We don't want to hurt anyone." That also pissed me off. Fucktards were obviously the ones who are out murdering people all this time, then have the audacity to break in here and act like saints with no wicked intentions. "Bullshit," I yelled. He turned and glared at me. "What was that?" he asked, now pointing his pistol at my face. "How the hell do you not want to hurt anybody when that's exactly what you've been doing for the past few weeks?" I shouted again. He giggled. "No, son. You see, we're doing this purely for the money. We aren't the ones who've been killed." Before he could even finish, Stanley suddenly blurts, "We have a safe." Everyone turned and looked at him, especially us within the family. Mom and Dad was bewildered. My sisters looked like they were panicking on the inside. We were shocked because, well, what the hell was he doing? We didn't have a safe. He turned and looked at Stanley. "I'll take you to our safe," Stanley exclaimed. "Is that right?" the guy said, with some slight joy. "But you have to promise not to hurt us," Stanley whimpered, eyes now starting to water. The masked man went and grabbed Stanley by his vest. My sisters didn't want to let him go. It took a few tugs to get Stanley out of the tight grip of the women. "Watch them," he told the other guys before demanding Stanley to take him to our non-existent safe. Stanley started to lead him back upstairs. I was really scared at this point. I mean, who knows what they'd do when they find out Stanley is lying? What the hell was he thinking? My heart pounded in my chest as I listened to them walk around above us. The guy holding my sisters at gunpoint stared at me. Part of me felt like he could actually hear my heart racing. My sisters were very distraught by the thought of Stanley being up there with whoever the hell that was. All three of them sat there sobbing their eyes out, probably expecting a disaster to strike at any second. And then it did. We all heard a gunshot go off upstairs. My parents both cried out. Angela straight up panicked, screaming very loudly and coming close to taking off and dashing up the stairs. The masked man behind them pulled Angela by the arm and yanked her back into her spot, as two of the other guys beside us rushed upstairs to see about their partner. "Stanley!" Angela cried. "Something happened to Stanley!" Kayla and Angie did their best to console her, not being too far from losing their shit themselves. To all of our surprise, the two men running upstairs were both shot before they even made it halfway up. They both yelled out in pain as they came tumbling down. "Shit!" I heard one of them yell. By the time they reached the bottom step, they were clearly no longer in shape to even finish this little heist they had planned. "What the hell happened?" one of the guys beside me yells, trotting towards the steps. "Fucker shot us," one of the injured guys groaned. "Who shot them?" The fourth guy did manage to make it up the stairs, but he was shot shortly after. He wasn't as lucky as his partners, as he was hit in the head and killed instantly. His body landed halfway down the stairs. My parents and sisters screamed again. Angie tightly covered her ears to drown out everything that was happening around her. The last uninjured guy remaining was still standing strong, but he was obviously very nervous and puzzled at what was happening. His shaking legs and frequent deep breaths were the biggest indication of this. He slowly began stepping towards the stairs, still pointing his Glock at us while looking forward. "What the hell?" he whispered, after seeing his two injured partners on the floor, and his other dead partner lying on the steps. He started pointing his Glock up the stairway as he began to slowly take baby steps up. Now that we no longer had guns in our faces, the thought of trying to rush him took over my mind, but he was too far away from my parents and I, and my sisters were too scared to try anything. He fired a few rounds upstairs. Who was he shooting at? "Stanley!" Angela cried out. No answer. "Stanley, are you okay?" Mom yelled, face scrunched up, ready to let out a cry. Dad hugged her tightly, her face leaning against his chest. Before I knew it, we suddenly saw a flash, occupied by a loud bang, and the guy's blood splattering across the wall behind him. A chunk of his upper head had been blown away. I could see part of his exposed brain in his head, just bleeding and leaking down the side of his face. His body dropped down on top of the injured guys behind him. They screamed wildly while struggling to push the dead body off of them. I gagged while looking away. Mom turned her head into Dad's chest even further as a way of protecting herself from the sight. We heard someone coming down the stairs. Slow and steady footsteps. Everyone was looking over at the stairway in anticipation, wanting badly to know who would be coming down the stairs. Was it the guy Stanley led upstairs, or was it Stanley? "Stanley?" Kayla whimpered. Still, no one answered. "Stanley, come on, man, is it you?" I said, trembling a little. Just more footsteps. I finally get a glimpse of who it was coming down the stairs. I saw a pair of legs starting to come into view. Khaki pants. Blood-stained khaki pants. "Stanley!" I exclaimed. "What happened?" For whatever reason, he refused to speak. When he fully came into view, I couldn't see his face yet, as the stairway pointed away from my parents and I. But I did see Stanley holding something that was totally unexpected. A revolver. This was kinda confusing to me as there were no revolvers present in the house before. He couldn't have gotten it from one of the masked goons because I swore they all came in with Glocks. So where the hell did he get it? The injured guys at the bottom of the steps stared Stanley up and down as he creeped down the stairs, their eyes wide in disbelief. "You little shit, you shot us," one of them snarled. I saw the expressions on my sister's face grow even more grim after seeing Stanley. Their faces now more puzzled than scared. "Stanley? What did you do?" Angie chokes out. One of the guys at the bottom of the stairs tried to quickly scramble for the Glock that lay just a few feet out of his reach. Stanley stepped on his hand, kneeling down and tossing the pistol away before he could grab it. Then he raised his revolver and fired one shot into each of the guy's arms. "God damn it," the guy winced in pain. Stanley turned to my parents and I, now revealing his blood-dripping face. His V-neck sweater was also stained red and spotted up with blood. But that wasn't the most daunting thing about him. What really had my spine on sub-zero was the fact that Stanley was grinning. He had one arm behind his back. Soon he brought that arm out into view, revealing a sawed-off shotgun. It was then the realization came to me, as I began to mentally put pieces together. I realized. "No," I started. "No." My eyes began to fill with tears. Stanley snickered. "Fuck, I wish you could see the look on your face," Stanley said, his grin growing a little wider, now exposing his blood-covered teeth. "Stanley, what the hell is going on here?" Dad asked, now standing up. Stanley ignored. "Come on, dude, seriously, why?" I suddenly raised my voice. You killed all those people." "No, I didn't. It was them," Stanley interrupted, pointing behind him and still showing those blood-covered teeth of his. "What?" one of the injured guys said. "We didn't kill anybody. We were only stealing money, I swear. We just wanted to use what was happening as leverage to cover up our tracks," he explained. "Come on, guys. They broke into our house for Christ's sake. You really gonna believe this ass wipe over me?" Stanley said, now laughing. "Guys, I'm telling you, we did not kill anybody," the injured guy tries to assure us. "Oh my God, Stanley, is this true?" Angie whimpered. Stanley didn't answer. He just stared back with a slight grin. He obviously wasn't actually trying to convince us he was innocent. He just got a kick out of getting everyone worked up. Angie uncontrollably started bawling. "Yeah, it's true. This kid's a fucking maniac." Before one of the injured guys could even finish their sentence, Stanley walked over to him and pointed the sawed-off at his face. The other guy beside him tried to roll away but could only move a few inches. My sister screamed before rushing over to my parents and I. Stanley blasted the guy in the face. His head instantly separated in a bloody outburst. The guy's blood and brain matter splattered then dripped down the wall behind his headless body. I spotted a piece of the guy's jaw a short distance away from him. The other injured guy started crawling away in a panic, trying to reach the front door. Stanley tucked his revolver in his pants then grabbed the guy by the ankle, dragging him back to the same spot. "Where the fuck do you think you're going?" Stanley said. "Please, just let me go, man," the man begged. "I'll leave and you'll never see me again, I swear." Stanley yanked the guy's mask off. "Yak mouth." Stanley laughed. "Well, what do you know? It's the little bitch slayer," Stanley exclaimed. I could see the fear in Yak Mouth's face. He tried again to flee away, but he was too incapacitated to make any big moves. "Dude, come on, I'm sorry," Yak Mouth started. Stanley punched him in the face, then kicked him in the stomach a few times. "Stanley, stop it," Mom demanded. "Stanley," Dad shouted, taking a few steps towards him. Before Dad got too close, Stanley drew his revolver and pointed it at him. sawed-off propped on his shoulder in his other hand. Dad stopped. I thought I've seen it all tonight. Never in a million years would I have ever thought Stanley would have the audacity to point a fucking gun at our dad. Now listen here, son. You and I both know you're not gonna shoot me. Let's just put the guns down and I'll go call the police, Dad said, pointing to the phone and taking a few more steps forward. Stanley cocked the revolver. Just stay back, Dad, Stanley sternly mutters. I stood up and said, we can end this now, Stanley. Don't do anything else stupid tonight. Stanley glanced at me for a split second, then looked away before saying, stay out of this, Tom. Angie stood up, then stepped forward. Then Stanley pointed the revolver at her. Angie's eyes were watery as she stared at the monster that was once her baby. What happened to you? She cried. Stanley turned back to Yakmouth, now pointing the revolver at him and ignoring Angie's question. By now, Yakmouth was bleeding from his mouth, now injured even worse on top of his first gunshot wound. Stand up, Stanley demanded. Let's see if you're worthy of living, or if you're a little bitch that deserves death instead. Yakmouth reluctantly stood up on his feet as best he could with his hands in the air, trembling and shaking from the fear and pain that had taken over him. Then he started crying. Looks like someone is a little bitch, Stanley taunted, clearly enjoying his suffering. Please, man, we just wanted money. We didn't have any intentions of hurting anyone, Yakmouth wailed. Stanley shot him in the knees with the revolver. Yakmouth fell to the floor again, now wailing harder than before while his kneecaps bled relentlessly. I heard Mom beside me gasp before letting out a small cry. My sisters were bundled up in a small group, hugging. Dad still stood his distance away from Stanley. He was probably waiting on a good opportunity to take Stanley down and put an end to this. But Stanley was watching his six very well. He made sure none of us got too close to him. Stanley, Dad shouted. I heard some slight anger in his voice. I couldn't look away. I wanted to, but as you've most likely already heard 1,000 times, it was like staring at a train wreck. I didn't tell you to sit back down again, Stanley told Yakmouth. What? Yakmouth cried, still trembling from the pain. Stand the fuck up, Stanley shouted. As Yakmouth started to stand up again, he let out an ear-piercing scream. The pain in his knees forced him to drop to the ground again. Stand up, Stanley repeated through clenched teeth. Yakmouth tried to stand again twice, but the same happened. The pain was too intense. This really pissed Stanley off. Listen here, motherfucker. You sit down one more time, I will fuck you up, Stanley shouted. Yakmouth was forced to try and stand on his disfigured knees for a fourth time. Now, although I hated what Yakmouth and his crew did, I didn't think he deserved this. Surprisingly, Yakmouth managed to stand on the last try, but he needed to lean on the wall behind him to do so. Doesn't count, you're using the wall, Stanley commented. Dude, come on, I can't stand up like this, Yakmouth cried. You know what? Fuck it, Stanley snarled, now cocking his sawed-off. Stanley pointed the shotgun at Yakmouth's right leg and blew it off. His leg detached from his body and dropped to the floor below him, leaving behind a running blood shower from the stump. We all heard that ear-piercing scream again. Then before Yakmouth could even hit the ground, Stanley blew his other leg away, leaving him completely legless. Stanley, what the fuck, man? I screamed. The living room was becoming a literal bloodbath. Stanley went and stood over Yakmouth's legless body, blowing both his arms off soon afterwards. Yakmouth's eyes rolled in the back of his head, and his limbless body started twitching uncontrollably. He drew his revolver and aimed it right at Yakmouth's head. Stanley wanted to see his brain splatter so badly that he started drooling. He might have just put Yakmouth out of his misery. Until there was the sudden sounds of sirens outside, occupied by red and blue flashing lights we could see through the curtains in the living room window. Stanley tucked his revolver back in, then dashed for the back door. "Now you wait a minute," Dad mutters, almost getting a hold of Stanley as he came flying past him. "Stanley, wait!" Mom yelled. Dad ran after Stanley through the kitchen, but stopped when Stanley ran out the back door. My sisters and I ran up behind Dad and joined him in calling after Stanley, begging him to come back. None of that did any good, as he just kept running into the night. Now, after a month has passed, no one in the house seems to be themselves. None of us barely talk to one another anymore. Everyone just creeps around the house in their own little world, trying hard to avoid making eye contact with each other. This is mainly because whenever we interact, a conversation will end up turning into a heated discussion about Stanley. You see, that night when Stanley ran off and the cops showed up, it turns out one of our neighbors called the police and reported gunshots and sounds of screaming. When they ran in our house and cleaned up the bloody aftermath in our living room, all of us were questioned. We faced the same detectives that questioned Stanley and I previously. They obviously noticed that Stanley wasn't around and wanted to know his whereabouts. That's when we did something foolish. Before we were all questioned, we all secretly agreed that we would not rat Stanley out. Together, we thought of a story to tell the detectives. When the masked guys broke in our house, they all got in an argument over some money. When an agreement wasn't met, they had a shootout. Stanley ran out the back door, and one of the intruders ran after him. We didn't know what happened to Stanley after that. We thought he may have been chased far away from the house and possibly killed. I really wish we hadn't have done that. Over the past month, Stanley has slayed about 4 more people. Now my family and I get up every day debating, no, arguing, over whether or not we should tell the truth and turn Stanley in. Mom and my sisters insist that we don't, because he's family and we shouldn't do that. Dad and I constantly remind them that Stanley is still killing people, and at this point, our silence has put blood on our hands too. Every time Dad and I come close to picking up the phone and contacting the police, they always talk us out of it. But the reason I decided to share my story is because I don't know what to do at this point. I know the right thing would be to go to the police and tell the truth, but we've already lied, and it wouldn't be done without doing possible prison time for lying to the law. For years I've been angry at Stanley for not being man enough. I hated when my sisters were always over affectionate with him. Now I do anything for my life to return to the way it was. All I know is, the old saying remains true. Be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it.